Most people think that evaluating a nuclear project is just about looking at how far along it is, but it's not. Because a project can look incredibly advanced on paper and still be nowhere near as real as it seems. So, in this video, I'm going to show you the exact filter to evaluate any nuclear project, not from the render, not from the funding round, not even from just the reactor. Because what most people are looking at is the front of a movie set, which can be convincing on camera, but falls apart as soon as you go behind the scenes. I've seen versions of this from the startup side, the design side, and the owner-operator side, and I'll show you the 5 steps and why this system is so powerful to realistically evaluate any nuclear project. I call it the nuclear reality filter. Now, the good news is that once you see these 5 bars, it'll completely change the way that you look at nuclear projects, and it becomes much harder to get fooled by glowing press releases. All right, so let's start with step 1, technology. And this is where a lot of people can get pulled in way too early, because a reactor can sound clever long before it's the right fit for a specific owner, site, regulator, grid, and operating organization. A lot of nuclear evaluations start with a technical idea. People hear a concept and think, yeah, that makes sense. The physics works, the reactor looks well designed, great. And that matters, but an owner has to go further. The better question is whether the technology matches the job you need it to do and the organization you actually have. Think of a medium-sized municipal utility. They want reliable electricity and are considering nuclear energy, but they have limited nuclear experience internally. Now, if they look at their options, there are tons of choices. A molten salt reactor might be fascinating. It might have real long-term promise and even solve problems that matter in the future. But that utility would also need to understand what comes with it: unfamiliar fuel handling, chemistry, materials, new waste pathways, licensing uncertainty, supplier depth, staffing, operator training, and technical support. A more conventional light water reactor may feel less exciting in a presentation, but if the use case is stable grid electricity for an inexperienced owner and an uncertain regulator, then it may be the more serious option. On the other hand, maybe the owner is an experienced operator looking to push technology forward and has a regulator that has clearly laid out a path for molten salt reactors. Then maybe it makes more sense to look at it more seriously. The point is, technology maturity is only part of the technology bar. Fit matters just as much. So when you evaluate the technology, don't stop at whether the concept is smart. Ask, is the selected technology appropriate for your mission, your site, your grid, your regulator, your workforce, your supply chain, and your appetite for first-of-a-kind risk? Can the safety case be validated? Can the methods be defended? Can the design be documented to the level your regulator and owner organization will require? Can your team actually understand what the vendor is giving you? That's the real technology question for an owner. A clever reactor is interesting, but a suitable reactor is bankable, licensable, buildable, and operable. And these are very different things. Now, the second step to clearly evaluate a nuclear project is to check the commercial traction. But this is a very different idea from what most people think of. For an investor, demand usually means buyers. For an owner, the issue is a bit more practical. If you choose this vendor, will the company, the supply chain, the service model, and the support base still be there when you need them? That's a bit of a different question. Because in nuclear, you are rarely just buying a machine. You are entering into a relationship that has to survive licensing, construction, commissioning, fuel supply inspections, outages, design changes, spare parts, operating support, and sometimes decades of technical questions. So, commercial traction matters because it tells you whether the vendor is becoming a real industrial supplier or whether it is mainly selling a future story. So imagine our municipal utility is looking at 2 vendors. The first is a big, well-established multinational organization with decades of experience, has built dozens of traditional reactors all around the world, and has 3 large projects it's currently building with multiple reactors at each site. Our little city puts out a request for a single 300-megawatt reactor. Now, how's the big vendor going to respond? They'll definitely work and try and get the sale, but after that, how committed is the vendor going to be? Their best engineers may be split across too many projects. The supply chain may be oversold. The small project may end up competing with attention for other customers who are larger, earlier, more strategic, or easier to serve. Okay, so what about the other option, a startup company that has never built a reactor yet? They're also going to do everything they can to try and get the sale, but they come with a different kind of risk. That small municipal utility may become the customer that keeps the vendor alive. That can give them influence, but it also means that they'll be carrying a supplier that still needs to build out its organization, its quality program, supply chain, long term service model, and that may be while the project is already moving. And what if this is the only reactor that that company ever builds and it becomes an orphan, leaving the support and supply chain isolated? Both of these scenarios bring their own kinds of risks, and that massively impacts the commercial decision making. So the question becomes, does this vendor have enough committed market traction to be durable, but enough focus and capacity to support my project properly? Now, the third step is where even serious and technically credible projects get into trouble, because good engineering is not the same as being delivery ready. I've seen projects that have excellent design teams with tons of smart people working very hard. And then they get blindsided by missing exactly what the regulator, the owner, or the commissioning team, or the construction sequence needs next. This is where the most important factor comes in. Have they done this before? Because activity that's being done for the first time adds risk. Let me show you. Imagine our little municipal utility decides to go with the new reactor startup company and signs a contract. There are a number of firsts to overcome. It's a new reactor, so it's the first time going through the regulator. If the local government hasn't seen a nuclear plant before, then it's the first time for them too. The site conditions may be different from what the design originally intended. The fuel path and supply chain still need to be established. It's the first time constructing the power plant. The owner organization has never dealt with nuclear before, and dozens of more firsts. Any one of these items on their own is a challenge, but the more that gets stacked up, the harder and riskier the project becomes. And the thing is, that's what delivery risk often looks like in real life. Not some dramatic headline, although that still happens, but just one piece of information in the right form at the right moment when suddenly everything depends on it. So when looking at project delivery, it's often more than just steel and concrete. Has the vendor delivered this kind of project before? Has it worked with a regulator like yours before? Can it produce the safety, design, procurement, construction, and commissioning information in the form that your project requires? Does it have a supply chain beyond prototypes? And does the owner know enough to catch the gaps before they impact the schedule? If you're an owner, operator, utility executive, or program lead, this is where project pain becomes real. So bar 3 is, can this actually be engineered, supplied, licensed, constructed, commissioned, and handed over in the form that the real project path demands? Now, the fourth step is the least understood from the outside. People think that once they choose a vendor, choose a reactor, sign a contract, and announce a project, that they now have a nuclear program. They do not. What they often have is dependence. A nuclear project isn't real until an organization around it can understand, challenge, and integrate what's being done. And it has to be technically competent enough to oversee the work that it may never perform itself. And this is a hard thing to balance, because you want the vendor's depth and the EPC's experience. You also want experienced specialist advisors and outside support where it makes sense. But ultimately, the owner still has to have the judgment. Owner capability shows up all over the place. For our little municipal utility, they're going to have to manage a rather scary list of activities. Owner capability is going to be needed for vendor oversight, quality assurance, licensing, procurement, fuel strategy, configuration control, document control, safety case ownership, construction integration, commissioning readiness, operational handover, long-term technical authority, and many more. But the thing is, they don't need a giant organization that duplicates every vendor function. All they need is enough internal competence to know when the vendor's answer is good, what's missing, and when it creates a problem somewhere else in the project. This is where new and expanding organizations can get exposed. Because when the owner cannot challenge the vendor can push whatever solution they want, which may or may not be the best solution for the client. And if you don't know enough to tell the difference, then you're not really in control of the program. This is why I always get nervous when people talk about projects as if selecting the technology or the contractor is the hard part. Very often, the harder part is building the organization that can handle the project intelligently. So when looking at the institution, does the owner have real internal competence? Can they challenge the vendor? Can they integrate across disciplines? Can they make decisions without outsourcing the judgment? If you are a new nuclear entity, country, or even just an expanding organization, this bar is much more difficult than the public narrative suggests. So, does the project have a credible institution around it, or does it mostly have dependency that looks like confidence? The fifth step is a tricky one because most people think it's totally black and white. Did they raise the money? And it's actually worse than that because it's kind of a lazy question that gets used to cover up all sorts of issues. Here's what I mean: capital is more than just money in, it also needs to provide resilience against all the problems that will eventually come about. Can it absorb a shock or a delay? What happens when risk gets repriced? What about supply chain disruptions or sanctions? A great example of this are utilities that had fuel supply chains with heavy exposure to Russia. Then in 2022, the Ukraine conflict escalated, sanctions went up, and suddenly capital tied up in that path was kind of stuck. And then all these plants were exposed to a problem that had always been there, but now it was in their face. So the work became very practical very quickly. What alternative supply strategy could be established? How much flexibility are in the other contracts? What other events could hit vulnerable parts of the chain? Does it make sense to stockpile certain high-risk items? For our little municipal utility, capital risk can come in several ways. Nuclear, even small modular reactors, are still very capital intense up front. Depending on the source of financing for the project, they may be on the hook to absorb any delays. That means another year of replacement power, interest from construction, the additional staff overhead, and more, all before their new plant earns a single dollar. For a small utility, this can really squeeze their finances, which means they may have to cut costs in other areas, like cutting owner capability, which just shifts the problems to later. Because that's the reality of capital. Having it is one thing, but making sure it works effectively is another. And the thing is, it's a mistake we all make. We all make assumptions without even realizing it. And then when those assumptions break, we find ourselves in reaction mode. So the main capital question is, can the project survive reality, not just modeling? And the reason I like thinking about projects this way is because it instantly stops people from getting hypnotized by the strongest looking part of a project. Because that happens all the time. A project looks great on technology, so people ignore the weak delivery. Or a project looks great on funding, so people ignore the weak institutional capability. And that's why so many projects look better than they really are. Because the thing is, people selling a reactor are always going to build a public story around the areas that are furthest ahead and try to downplay the parts that are behind, which makes sense because that's marketing 101. The thing is, evaluating progress is just one part of the problem. For nuclear projects to be successful, you've got to have an organization that's capable. But what if you're trying to build out a project but relying too much on the vendor for support? So if you want to learn how to fix that, in this video, I'll show you exactly how I've built internal capability so that you and your team can stay in control for the long term.